or she's not yet at least, but she and I were on a call. She's part of a group of council presidents, which is what some cities call their mayor pro tem and other mayor pro tems, and asked me to join them. And there was a discussion around, I believe it was Columbus, Ohio. But a lot of what we're hearing from our community input group today, what they were talking about was along the same lines. And they did a community survey that had people check the types of calls that they felt like they'd be comfortable with a civilian responding to, the types of calls they felt like they'd be comfortable with a civilian who had nearby law enforcement backup if needed, and the calls that they felt like really needed to be that law enforcement officer being the first responder. And it was amazing to the point that was made just a bit ago from Mr. Bergman, but then also what Mr. Driggs said will be discussed in the Budget and Effectiveness Committee today. It was a staggering amount in terms of the percentage of time dedicated to calls that the community largely agreed did not necessarily need to be a sworn law enforcement officer being the first one who got to that call or that incident. And so I do think that is a place where we have an incredible opportunity to allow the police to do what it is we think the police ought to be doing, which is addressing things like violent crime, and not having them always be the first person that responds to something that really isn't a situation where there is not really a threat. There's maybe not a need for a law enforcement officer to insert themselves in that situation, at least not initially. So I'm hopeful that we can follow the model that several other cities in the country have done to identify those things. And frankly, I think it benefits not only our community, but it benefits our officers because we don't have them bogged down doing some of the stuff that's really not what we have a police department in place to do. And yet we have just asked them to kind of, wherever there's a gap, we've asked them to fill it. And I think it's to the detriment of our department, our officers, and to the detriment of the community. And I think we need to help them get back focused on what their true mission is. Ms. Johnson has her hand up and has something to say on this as well.
You know I have something to say on this. I just want to express my passion and my support on this issue. You all, I think you all know that I'm an advocate for brain injury survivors, and that mirrors mental health and can cause behavioral health issues. And this is just such a huge problem. I recommend the Crisis Mobile Unit. They do a phenomenal job. If we could expand that, that would be very appropriate. Another area, and I don't know if you all discussed this or if the police are considering this, when an EMT or a firefighter, the fire station is called for an emergency, such as a seizure, there's a post-ictal state, which can be confusion and delusion and just behavioral issues. So I would like to see that considered as well. Police can be used, I guess, as a backup, but instead of a first responder to go along with the firefighters or the EMT, if we could have someone who's trained in these invisible illnesses and behavioral health. But this is so necessary, and it is a win-win situation for the community and also for our officers. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Ajmera?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just thank all the community input committee members. You're all putting in a lot of time and effort in making some of these policy suggestions. We certainly appreciate your time, and this is all voluntary, so we certainly appreciate the commitment and the passion that you all bring to the table, and also our chief for willing to listen to you all. I did have a question on the presentation that Mr. McGill had done. Is he still on the call?
I believe he is.
Okay. So, Mr. McGill, I know that your committee had discussed the external review of CMPD's budget, um, and not just the numbers, like you said. So what is the scope of the work that you all had discussed and that you'd like council to take an action on?
Rodney, can you unmute yourself, please?
I missed that.
Mr. McGill, were you able to hear Ms. Ashmera's question?
I missed Dimples. I heard everything but that. What did she ask? What did you ask, Dimples?
Ms. Ashmera?
Yes, so Mr. McGill, I heard your committee's recommendation about CMPD's budget review, but you wanted to look more than just the numbers. So could you just elaborate on the scope of the external review?
The type of
Yes.
was you finished?
Yes.
The type of review that people are talking about is one that would fix the problem. It's really not whether it's a review, or audit, investigation. The end of it, when I ask people, and I say, what do you want to have it for? Because they want to see how tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars can go into an area, community, and nothing changes. That's the end result of us looking into those programs, is to get the programs to work. We know they funded, we know they're there, and we're seeing people and children all day, literally today, who need it badly. And we're stuck in a situation where we know we're right, and the people we're talking to know we're right, yet it's an emergency, and we don't have time, yet we got to go through this time. So when I say and speak about that part of the budget that need to be looked at, besides just the money, we want to see, why is the services not getting to the actual people? Why is the money still coming, yet the people who the money's meant for is not actually getting the service? And as a community, we're already in that gap, and we want to take that, opportunity that we have now to go further into that, as just opposed to looking to see if the numbers add up.
Thank you, Mr. McGill. I think the manager wants to address that question as well.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you, Mr. McGill. It's been a while since we had a chance to talk.
Good to hear you.
Good. So, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair and Mayor, members of the committee, I don't disagree with what Mr. McGill has said. It's been a lot of discussions about what is like the dollars and different columns and different budget lines and things of that nature. And I believe that Ryan and Council Member Driggs, through his committee, they've done a great job of showing that we can do that. I think what Mr. McGill is saying, and I totally agree with, is the how. Is it how are these dollars being deployed in such a way that we're not just looking at outputs, but we're looking at outcomes? And I think we've dealt with terminology, and maybe let's just move away from terminology. I think an assessment makes a lot of sense, because we should have an outside entity assessing how successful our programs are. And if they aren't reaching the outcomes that we want, then we should potentially redeploy those resources. So, Mr. McGill, I appreciate everything you're saying, and I agree with you. I hope that I've captured what you're saying, and that is, let's focus on the how and how we are performing with our policies and the resources that are given.
Yes, I would say that's the goal of the audit when it comes to the end. The tactic is the audit or the review. The end is, let's make this work because we got everything that we need.
Thank you, Mr. McGill.
So just to summarize, okay. So I agree with Mr. Manager here as to the assessment of the programs, and all the dollars that are being spent on the programs, are they meeting expectations and the outcomes that we expect. So I know this was the recommendation also provided by Mr. Thomas, who had done a presentation on after-school programs or other programs. So is this something that council needs to take an action on, Mr. Manager? for an outside party to review our programs.
So Councilmember Ashmere, I think where we are with what the chairman suggested today is that there would be information shared. This committee on October the 5th would come with a series of recommendations, not necessarily anything that has to be voted on today. And that series of recommendations from this committee and all the various committees would be the work plan or the plan moving forward for the city as we address whether it's reimagining police, violence interruption, or having safe communities, if that's a fair assessment, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
If I may, can I just make a comment in reference to what Mr. McGill just said? I think it goes beyond Mr. Jones. It goes beyond us simply knowing the how and changing the way we do things in terms of assessing who can do the work. In my mind, getting an outside entity to come in to do an investigation of how we're doing is spending money that we don't need to spend. I think that this body and the city council has a responsibility to do some things a little differently, which means look at groups who may do things a little more holistically, but have the capacity to get the work done. And I think that's something that has not been done before. There's some groups right here in the city that can do the work, who have the capacity to do the work, but they have never had an opportunity to actually get the work done and get the funding to do the work.
Thank you, Reverend Mack.
Can I add one thing to that, Chair Eagleston?
Yes, sir.
I think that, now that Corinne said what she said, and, I kind of left it out. My main part is with the collaborations of the city, with the community organizations since 2016, Kenneth Lamont Scott, that time of September, there's been a very, very large network of community organizations that have collaborated with the city. I think a lot of us would agree. And along with what Ms. Mack said, if that large collaboration is somehow centralized, put into some type of form, even using a jump start, and activate that group of people to do a lot of these things in the community, not just the crime prevention, the thing that goes toward crime. When people see a clean area, for instance, they don't think violence. When you see trash everywhere, violence is much less it's little things in the community from all through the services that's already in place through the jump start that you could match it with the Kalia program and institute the same system by bringing all of those organizations in the areas they in to prevent a whole lot of things that may be happening. I just want to end by saying that Charlotte is not Baltimore. It's not 300 and something murders a year. We have an opportunity to keep these numbers low and do something now. So I just wanted to add that, and thank you, Ms. Mack.
Yes, thank you, Mr. McGill. And I think it's a great point, and the manager referenced earlier how there is work going on in several of our council committees right now as it relates to safe communities. And it's not just about the police department or violence interruption, maybe in the way that we think about it in this committee, but it is about, to your point, things like making sure that we're doing beautification efforts in our community. We talked in the Transportation and Planning Committee meeting yesterday about how we can design our city and design our built environment in a way that lends itself to safer communities. And so I think there's things in the way that we build our city, in the way that we maintain our city, that, to your point, can help be in terms of preventative help from that violence ever occurring in the first place. And certainly in Mr. Mitchell's Committee of Economic Development, making sure people have job opportunities and have places that they can be proud to live and work and play. It changes the whole dynamic. So I think you're exactly right there. Ms. Ashmere, did you have anything else before Ms. Watlington? And then, and I know we've got another community input group report as well.
Yes.
Larkins.
All right, hold on. If everybody will remember, and we've got a hand raise function on the WebEx. So if everyone will use it, it's easier for me to air traffic control that way. Ms. Ashmere still has the floor. I've got Ms. Watlington, but if folks can raise and lower their hands as needed, I'll use that to determine the order. But Ms. Ashmere, you're still up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I support the committee's recommendation about the review of our programs and making sure that there are specific outcomes and metrics and performances that is out there where we are actually tracking the success of each program that we fund.
Thank you. Ms. Watlington?
Yes, I've got a couple of quick things. Firstly, as we talk about metrics and the outcomes from these youth programs, in our first meeting, I requested that we investigated specifically in the hotspot areas, in particular, what these metrics look like in those neighborhoods for the youth programs. Are we
Ms.
talking
Watlington,
about,
if you're able, could you speak a little louder for us?
can you hear me any better?
A little bit.
I don't know, my iPad's all the way up. So, in the first meeting, when we talked about youth programs, I requested an assessment of the outcomes of these youth programs, particularly in our hotspot areas. So I want to make sure that I'm clear. What we are talking, first of all, was that completed? And if so, are we going to see that today? Or is that are we rolling that same information into this assessment we're now talking about?
Mr. Manager?
So, Ms. Watlington, Councilmember Watlington, please stop me if I'm going down a bad path here, but if we step back a little bit to this violence reduction framework that was approved back in January, we did have those hot spots. The hot spots we've called priority areas. 3 of the 4 priority areas are in our corridors of opportunity. We have a data analytics group now that hard work by the mayor. Bloomberg's gave us some resources, and we finally have something that's robust for the first time ever. So as we do the data analytics, if I'm understanding what you're saying, we will always begin in those priority areas because that's a part of the framework that the county and the city agreed upon, and it's one of the reasons why we are starting on Beatty's Ford Road and also I-85 in Sugar Creek. Did I totally miss it, or did I address what you were asking?
I think that is foundational to what I'm asking. What I'm wanting to know is, since our first Safe Communities meeting where we discussed youth programs in these areas, has anybody completed any data analysis with these outcomes?
Right. So what we did do is I think we took 2 swings at this. The first time we gave you the list of the programs. The second time we were able to show you some of the outputs and some of the number of youth that were coming. I'm not sure that we pinpointed it by focus area, and I think that's what was missing.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Vice Chair?
So,
respond to that.
City Manager, just to clarify, you actually also broken down by categories. So you show one that will relate to workforce development, one was on leadership, so you did kind of put in that category for us.
Ms. Watlington?
So if somebody could resend that to me, because what I'm looking for is to be able to connect the dots. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it sounds like what we're asking for is an assessment to do that. And I want to make sure that this time around we get to the intent, which was for me to see where we had opportunities to expand the program or revise the program so that they would be most effective.
I think the manager's on the same page with you now.
Okay, so now, I'm sorry. So I do believe where we were, no, I totally recall now. One route that we could take was to utilize My Brother's Keeper to look at some of the data, which goes back to some of the questions that Minister Mack has raised today, as well as Mr. McGill, is how do you use some of the organizations that are already in the community doing work to do some of this analysis. So Federico, did I get that right? Is that something that Don could potentially do? And I know the chief.
It was up for discussion. So Don does have a data person that just came online. But there are other organizations as well. My Brother's Keeper was just one that had been brought up specifically.
Chief?
Yeah, Councilmember Watlington, I think you are referring to an analysis that we are doing within CMPD with the youth programs and who are we reaching out and affecting within those areas. And we are still working on that. I just got an update on that. That is something that's going to take some time. And we have been working on it, and we still are, so it's not complete yet.
Okay, yes, that's what I'm talking about. So that said, then am I to assume that as part of this assessment that we're discussing now, that information is going to be included?
Yes.
Okay. The two more things. So as far as recommendations today, just a procedural question. I want to make sure I understand as a follow-up to Councilmember Ejmira's question. Is the intent of today to review for the committee to then vote on what we want to go forward for full council consideration? Or am I understanding, Mr. Chair, that you are asking us to forego that process and bring all of these recommendations forward for October 5th?
I don't know for sure yet. I mean, we're moving along pretty well, but the top priority today was to make sure that we were able to get through everything, because we want to make sure we have the benefit of having all of the information before we go to the October 5th gathering with the entire council, so that we as a committee can lead the conversations amongst the full council. Obviously, that's where policy decisions can be made. So as to whether or not we vote on something today, I think that's less important than we get all of the information, because we're going to have an 8 or 9 hour day on Monday. We'll have ample time there to get into maybe the minutia of some of this stuff as it relates to how we might want to shape policy. So I don't know that we necessarily vote on or not vote on anything today, but I just want to make sure we're able to cover everything.
Okay, and so then my last question is, I've got this packet here. It would be helpful to, or let me ask it this way. Is there somewhere in this packet where each of these recommendations from each topic are consolidated? Because I've got 238 pages, and I see recommendations in various forms in different places. Is it possible, or does it already exist and I'm just overlooking it, a place where each of the recommendations are listed and categorized by topic?
238 pages wasn't consolidated enough for you? I think they're all in there, but I'm not sure that they're in there in as readable and digestible a format as they could be. So I think that's hopefully an easy ask for staff to make sure that on October 5th, I know they're in the version of the slides that we had on the screen, but I think we can have them all compiled. I don't know what page that's on, or I would tell you, but I'm trying to find it.
Mr.
Anybody
Chair.
have the page number handy? Yes, sir.
Well, I don't have the page number handy. Federico, I believe what we did is we tried to allow the community input groups to populate these spreadsheets, so it wasn't that the city staff would dilute anything. So, go ahead.
Correct, Mr. Manager. So we had, and several of the facilitators are on the call, we had facilitators kind of navigate this discussion, take down the thoughts that community members were presenting, and complete the subgroup analysis forms that you have in your packet, Councilmember Watlington and others. And so I'm not quite sure what order they're in, but you would typically see the topic highlighted at the top or listed out as the point of discussion. I did notice one typo on one of the forms, but otherwise it kind of lists out what the recommendations are based on the factors of consideration that were listed.
Given that these are presented to us sort of in the unedited language of the committee, would there be some value between now and Monday in working staff and obviously checking in to make sure that the original intent of the input group is conveyed, but staff taking what are the recommendations in sort of the plain language of the discussion that was had in the input group and putting that in the language of more of a policy recommendation, the way that it would be presented to council and move forward to CMPD. And then, but again, with a touch point in there to make sure that the members of the community input group feel like that is reflective of what they were getting at.
Yeah, and I'm okay with having this document. I just would appreciate, because what I don't want to do is we go do this work and we meet and we miss something because it's embedded in a bunch of information. Alternatively, it would be helpful for me to have this not electronically so that we can take that into the meeting next week and we can prepare page by page, mark it up, make sure stuff is together. So whichever way is easier for you. But I just want to make sure that we're looking at everything and that nothing gets dropped because it's not necessary. It might be on page 157 and it can link back to page 2. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
And Ms. Watlington, hello, this is Marie Harris with the Budget Office. What we can also do, like you said, is they've been sprinkled in various meeting packets. I can pull them all together. So you have verbatim what the committees gave you, but we have them all, like there's a page to 3 pages on each topic, and we can pull them all together so they're easy for you to access. And then, like you said, in hard copy.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Watlington?
That's it for me right now.
Mr. Jones?
So, Mr. Chair, and so I would highly recommend that staff does not edit these at all. Let's keep them pure because words mean a lot. And so let's just leave them the way they are.
That suits me fine. The vision I had for it would have been that we would have seen the unedited as well as the edited. But to your point, I think if there's any concern that it might muddy the intent of what was written, then we can, as a council, determine, or we can read and understand the intent, and then we can shape the language as we make determinations on the 5th of what policy recommendations we might make. I've got the mayor, and then I've got, so I saw that you raised your hand. So Ms. McCarthy, I've got you and Mr. McGill and Reverend Mack that I see hands up. So we'll start with Ms. McCarthy.
I just kind of wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Rodney was saying. And one of the things is, I know when they were talking about some of the programs that they do have when you're looking at the budgets, my only issue and concern is, I don't see no police officer when we got kids in the courtroom, when they're standing in there talking about some of these programs that they're offering, that they want, that they want to keep getting funded. They're not in the courtroom saying, hey, instead of a deferred prosecution program, they're not saying, here's this type of mentoring program, empowerment, enrichment. That's not something being implemented when, if you're trying to go in those hot hit areas, you're trying to implement a certain program. So that's why one thing I feel like the real importance of an audit, because we really need to see how it affected, because I think it had like 99% or something like that with the success rate for urban colored people. And I'm just kind of iffy about those numbers, because we look at the numbers system that's going on with the rate from crimes that don't match. That's one thing. And one of the other issues with the significance to the mental health piece, I think is very important, because when you look at it from a criminal aspect, when you do a medicine evaluations, if a person is going through something and a person have gotten medicine, and a lot of times they have to wait for the medicine to get in their systems, you never know how their body is going to react. Meanwhile, somebody can go commit a crime. Now they're being criminally charged for something they wouldn't have technically done if it wouldn't have been something they was medically provided. So it's not like they're going to have a pharmaceutical or the doctor or the therapist, facing a judge or a jury. It's going to be the person that committed the act. So I think it is very important that we do really strongly implement the cahoots based on a lot of issues. And I have family that stay. I don't live in the Batersford Road area, but I do have an uncle and a sister. So I advocate hard for that side because they on that side. But I can talk to you about the 2A, 208. But I'm done.
Appreciate you, Ms. McCarthy. And like I said, we have Mr. McGill and Reverend Mack, and then I do want to make sure we give Ms. Otley ample time to make her presentation out of the community input group as well. So as soon as we hear from Mr. McGill and Reverend Mack, we'll ask Ms. Otley to talk.
Okay.
So,
hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
I just wanted to make the point that as the process begins to start bringing the community more into the relationship, I want the city council to keep in mind that there's different parts of our community. You have a large part of our community that they've gotten to the age where they're more administrators. You're going to need actual people, not just doing numbers and services. You're going to need to also meet with those people who are actually on Catherine Simmons, on West Boulevard, Beach Nut, this in the hot areas on the east side, Heritage Park, just all in the Crescent areas, and having those people and not going to the same process of the same old people tabulating numbers is not going to help either. So I want City Council to keep in mind that even if it's not in your notes, what we want to do is success here, and success means bring in all stakeholders, everybody closest to the problem, and that's all I wanted to say.
Agreed. Thank you, Mr. McGill. Reverend Mack?
I'm going to expound a little bit more on what Rodney McGill just said. My vision is a little different, just based on some of the national work that's been done. It goes beyond us bringing in stakeholders. You know, we have to bring in stakeholders, and I don't even like that term, quite frankly. But the community leaders, when I say community leaders, I'm talking about folks not even on this call today. I'm talking about people who are in the community that are respected by their communities, that many of you may not even know. It could be Big Mama or Medea, but they are respected in their community. Those are the people who have influence, so influencers have to be part of this conversation. But I'm going to go beyond that. If we are talking about making some real change, we have to be proactive. We have to go beyond the issues that are happening right now. We have to go deeper to find out what is the foundational problem in these families and in these individuals who are causing some real concerns in our communities. We need to be honest about the drug issues in our communities and how we clean that up. We need to be honest about the fact that Black and brown people are deeply traumatized and never ever seek help for their traumatization. And how do we deal with those issues? And last but not least, if an organization does not have the ability to do a syllabus or curriculum or teach people how to be different in how they see themselves and how they move in their communities, they are simply doing the same things they're doing right now, which is going and talking to people. It takes more than that. Everybody does not have the capacity to create sustainable, tangible change. That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Reverend Mack. I'll remind everybody, if you can, to lower your hands. And Ms. Otley, if you are ready, we would love to hear from you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm presenting for Group 4. Group 4 is comprised of Reverend Peter Weary, Ann Kushter Stepp, Ryan McGill, and Reverend Christy Snow. Our task was to look at the criminal process. And one of the first of all, can everyone hear me? Let me ask that.
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay, great. Our first thing that we looked at was the bail bond system. And our concerns were that 3 out of 5 people being held in the U.S. jail system today have not been convicted of a crime. We have thousands of people sitting in jail right now in North Carolina awaiting trial that have not been convicted of a crime as well. They're being held solely because of their inability to pay bail. In effect, the cash bail system has criminalized poverty and perpetuates inequalities in the jail system. Spending even a few days or a few nights in jail can result in people losing their jobs, their housing, and even custody of their children. So one of the things that we looked at was reforming pre-trial practices to ensure that defendants' rights to be presumed innocent and treated equally under the law are preserved regardless of their income. We also looked at a criminal summons replacing an arrest. The criminal summons can be handed out for minor crimes, requiring a person to appear in court without going to jail first. So we're looking at ending cash bail. District Court Superior Judge Thurman Morrison stated, "There is no evidence that money is needed to get people back in court. It is irrational, ineffective, unsafe, and profoundly unfair." The other thing that we looked at also was felony arrests. At the felony level, to provide accommodations for legal exceptions, such as petitions for a new trial due to jury tampering, ineffective counsel, and jury nullification, for persons with legitimate and proven legal exceptions. Also, to end the requirement for treatment and activities during probation which require someone to admit to an offense. The other thing that we also looked at was probable cause. What is probable cause? It's written that an officer, probable cause is described as an officer believing that a person has committed a crime or is in the process of committing a crime. So we would like that to be defined. We'd like to know, what reasonable is, and we'd also, want it to be, I guess, not open to an individual interpretation. How can that be established, uniformed across CMPD as a whole? Because one officer might see something and think that it's probable cause, and the other officer might not. So those were some of the things that we looked at.
Thank you, Ms. Otley.
And
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that was the conclusion of what we had.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Rios?
Thank you so much to all of the community input group members for presenting today. Ms. Otley, I know that you had an amended form that you wanted to share. I asked that you please send that in so that we can get that to the members of council on the committee. And then anyone else that's added to their form, if you can please send an updated form so that, again, there's no confusion around what was presented today and how it correlates to the forms that were offered up to the members of the committee.
A couple of quick housekeeping things real quick, and then I want to get back to what Ms. Otley was talking about. One, I've been asked, and I'd like to acknowledge that we did introductions at the beginning, but since then, Councilmember Winston and Mayor Pro Tem Eisel have both joined us on the call. Thank you all for being here. Mayor Pro Tem Eisel has made the request that all of the documents that were provided to the committee members today, if we can make sure to get those to the rest of council if they haven't already. They already have? Okay, Mayor Pro Tem, you should have received that when we did, probably just 3 hours ago. Around 10:30. So anybody who did not receive that or can't find that, let us know. We'll make sure you get it. And then I'd also like, I know I had a discussion, and I'm not going to be able to do it justice. So I'll ask Mr. Bakari. I know he's serving on, and I don't remember the name of the group either, but on a state bipartisan board right now that's discussing a lot of stuff. And one of the things that he told me he talked about just in the last week or two was actually around bail reform. So I'll ask him to recap that for us, and I'd like to get Ms. Otley's take on some of the discussions that I know he's having at a state level. Mr. Bakari's not real good with technology. He forgot to unmute himself. Don't let all those lights behind him fool you. He's still muted and still talking, though I'm not sure he ever stops talking. Mr. Bakari, would you like to join us? I'm going to take that as a no. I'm not sure he can hear us either. Well, this is going. We're going to proceed as if this is going well. Okay, well, we'll come back to him. Did anybody else have any questions for Ms. Otley while Mr. Bakari figures out how to unmute himself?
Mr. Chair, this is Councilmember Wallington.
Yes, Ms. Watlington.
And maybe it's not so much for Ms. Otley as it is for the group. How, obviously, as she mentioned, much of the scope in this particular bucket in regards to the criminal process exists within the justice system itself. So my thought then is that whatever are the outcomes of this conversation or next week's conversation is going to show up in intergovernmental or CJAG or in some way we'll be engaging other bodies. Is that the intent of this component, or is there something specific that the council is being asked to do?
Mr. Manager.
So I stepped out for a moment. I think I captured it. So there would be the October 5th with the whole goal of a comprehensive plan coming out. Then we would present that plan to the community at the next council business meeting. I believe that the way that this next Safe Communities Committee is structured, that there could be input again on the 13th or the next day, and then there would be a formal vote for the entire plan at the last business meeting of October. So the community engagement would be between now and the last business meeting in October.
Because it would allow for a public forum for people to come and speak on any of the recommended changes on the 12th.
But as far as this particular item or this bucket, criminal process, given that much of it is not actually within city council's sphere of control, what is our role, or are we in need of defining it, or what was the intention behind including this here? Is there something specific that council is being asked to do as it relates to the criminal process?
Yeah, potentially it would be a matter of including something on our legislative agenda, but even if it didn't necessarily make the legislative agenda that the intergovernmental committee will bring forward to the full council, I think that if there is consensus among the council, or at least the majority of the council, that something would be helpful in our efforts towards all of the ends that we've been discussing, that we would advocate either individually or collectively to the district attorney's office, the sheriff's department, the legislature, whoever would have the decision-making power to make some of the changes that we might see as necessary for the work we're doing.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we get real crisp about what our deliverable is here, because what I don't want to have is that we've had this discussion and the community has invested in doing this work and it not end up somewhere actionable.
Agreed. Mayor Lyles?
In response to Ms. Watlington's question about landing somewhere, I think that's going to be an important question for the everybody's recommendations, but specifically, we've got that Criminal Justice Advisory Committee that serves as a way to address these issues within the courtroom, and I think it would be a good place to start there. We have acknowledged that group has not worked very well or functioned very well for the lack of participation, and I believe in intergovernmental, they are having a discussion about that participation being appropriately staffed so that these kinds of conversations are highlighted and are dealt with a pathway to the county, the courts, the DA, who are all supposed to be in the room.
All right, and I think we have Mr. Bakari back. Mr. Bakari, the question I posed to you earlier, and I guess you were on another call there for a minute, so the question I posed to you earlier was, I know you are serving on, and I don't recall the name, but a state board bipartisan group that's discussing some of these similar types of issues. And Ms. Otley had just presented to us on some recommendations around bail reform, and I wanted to get you to summarize the discussions y'all have had in Raleigh on that topic. And I'd love to get Ms. Otley's take on some of the things that have been discussed there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the House Select Committee on Criminal Justice Reform, and it's like you said, bipartisan across the state. A lot of legislators, but also select members from city councils, county commissions, sheriffs, police departments. So we've been going through a number of items. Honestly, it's been a lot of information gathering being presented by a lot of experts. We've seen data across the state that is really astounding in the number of minor offenses, everything ranging from small drug offenses to traffic-related offenses, and just the amount of friction that adds and volume that adds into the system, from bogging down police officers to bogging down the court systems and everything like that. So it's been eye-opening to get a look at that data, as well as be able to collaborate with our partners across the state on what they're seeing and doing. One of the items that my co-chair of intergovernmental, Councilman Winston, and I are working on exploring with the district attorney is the bail reforms. One specific item is in relation to an equity-related item there, which is taking potentially bail out of certain violent crimes, just on the mere factor that is it fair that with a certain violent level of crime that someone with the money can get out and someone without it can't. So again, there's a lot of exploration left to do there. We're also looking at a lot of things like the digitization and digital records across the entire criminal justice system. We've seen everything from the courts to the DA's office, just the paper-based insanity that really bogs down our system and it creates a really slow process. And it's something that can be streamlined and unchoke some of the bottlenecks. So that was a big item that we've been discussing. And there are several others, but it's been a good process so far. So I think in a mixture between that, as well as what the co-chair and I are doing in working up the legislative agenda right now, paired with this committee's work, we're all going to kind of triage there and figure out which best practices we want to move on.
Yeah, I think there's two ends to the bail reform discussion. To your point, if there is a serious violent crime and someone is still potentially a threat, what is the logic behind saying, well, if you're rich and you commit that crime, you can get back out on the streets, and if you are not rich and you commit that crime, you're stuck in jail. But at the same time, and I think maybe Ms. Otley was making this side of the point more so, and I agree with it as well, there are people who are held up because they can't pay bail on low-level offenses that I think a majority of our community would agree that person is not a flight risk, that person is not a threat to commit any sort of violent act. And by holding them simply for the fact that they can't make the bail, we then put them further in the revolving door of the criminal justice system because they're missing work, they're potentially losing their job, they're not getting their income, they're going to be further unable to make those payments in the future, and then if they lose their job, obviously it could spiral into a whole other set of things. So I do think that's a place, obviously not one that the city council can just unilaterally make changes, but I do think we've got a platform where we can lobby for changes, and there would be an enormous amount of benefits across a bunch of different levels of our criminal justice system if we go that route.
Yeah, that logically makes sense to me. So we will definitely be looking at that side of that coin as well.
Reverend Mack, I see your hand up.
I think that Cass and I are on the same page with this. It seems as if this conversation is going back to systems concerns, and our concerns are human concerns and the adverse effect of folks being incarcerated without the ability to pay a bail. I'm going to make the same suggestion to this body that I made to DA Spencer Merriweather, and he took the suggestion well and did what I suggested. I suggest that this body reaches out to the DA in Philadelphia, Krasner, who has been doing some phenomenal work around bail reform. And that work also dealt with policing and how police dealt with people in the most impoverished areas, the people who are the most disenfranchised, and the people who are more likely to have high recidivism. This issue is a major concern for our young boys and girls, specifically Black and brown boys and girls who are incarcerated when they did not have to be incarcerated. It starts there. And then to be incarcerated, knowing that your family cannot afford to get you out of jail. And what are the long-term effects on these young people? That is the issue that Cass was bringing to the table today. How do we resolve that issue? We know the system is built for the purposes of ensuring that we are incarcerated. Black people know that. And so I'm not looking at a system so much and how do we clear up the bottlenecking with system. I'm looking at how do we protect and safeguard the lives of people who are being incarcerated who cannot afford bail.
Thank you, Reverend Mack. The DA in Philadelphia, is that a relationship that you or Mr. Merriweather have and can facilitate a connection for us?
I do have one, but Mr. Merriweather has reached out to him. They do now have a relationship.
Great. I think that would be a great person to hear from and to learn from, so I appreciate the suggestion. Were there any other questions for Ms. Otley or any of the folks who presented from the community input group? Because I want to start towards a point of recapping all of what we'll discuss, all of what we have discussed, and how that moves forward to the 5th and what all subject matter we'll be covering on the 5th. So if there are any other questions, clarifying questions on the presentations from the input group, I want to give an opportunity for those. And I'll echo what Ms. Ajmera said earlier and others have said, which is, we are, as a city council and the city government, greatly appreciative of the work that the community input group did. No one was paid to be a part of this group. I know it took up a lot of time, and even just in the last 2 weeks, we asked you to meet twice as often as you had been just to get it all in before our committee meeting today. So I know you did it because you have a passion for the work and you have a passion for making this community a safer place to live, work, and play. And we appreciate everything that you did, not only in this group, but that you do in the community every day. So thank you once again. Mr. Manager, if you will talk to us about the next steps and talk to us about what we can expect on the 5th.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one thing that I would like to make sure that Marie is able to send out, or maybe even Jason puts on our website today, is just this framework that we have to address violence. And the reason I keep going back to it is because I want to talk about the 5 pillars, which seem very consistent with our discussion today. Intergovernmental collaboration, community collaboration in priority areas, interrupt violence, invest in community-led efforts, and use data and evidence. So as we start to think about moving to the 5th, this becomes the foundation in a lot of what we have been discussing, especially around investing in community-led efforts, I think will be a driving force. So what I see now, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Mayor, members of the committee, is that we will utilize all of the subgroup analysis, even those that I guess weren't a part of today, but information that has been wrapped up, whether it's the Citizens Review Board or the Civil Service Board. So we've had a good deal of these types of wrap-ups. What I will say, and I'll go back to where you and the chief started this morning, there are some things that obviously have come out of this work, like 8 Can't Wait, neglect of duty, the no-knock search warrants, the banning of the CS gas. A lot of what we talked about today were related to calls that potentially we can redirect. Some of the things that we're already doing, like the crisis mobile unit, can we double down with that, as well as some of the programs that we're seeing throughout the country, like Cahoots and STARS. We talked about an assessment. We talked about, I will use the term that locks it all together. Well, we'll go back to investing in community-led efforts, mental health, bail reform. So the way I see it is that we can just always go back to these documents, use that as the baseline moving forward. And what I would propose to this committee is to allow the team, with Federico heading up all of the community input group information, as well as the data that we're getting from some of the other staff members, to let us come back with, if you will, a straw man to start off on the 5th, which I'm committed will be comprehensive, dealing with what's before us.
Mr. Eggleston, may I?
Mayor Lyles.
When we started out on this journey, we had our framework, but we didn't have all of the participation that we needed to make it happen. So I want to start with kind of like where we might end and talk about 3 key points that I think ought to be considered by the council. The first one being the context in which this work has been done between the community, CMPD, everyone that has participated needs to be acknowledged. And I think it's really important to have a document that actually is a report with the acknowledgments of people's participation and the effort that was put into it to get this framework done. And I think that the second part that I think we ought to have is that we will know that we have to have the recommendations that are approved by council, but we also ought to acknowledge every recommendation that was made. Some of these, and I think this is what I asked the manager about on the 5th, is I'm asking this right now, is that to say, we will have a number of recommendations, and the question would be, how does the council put them in priority? I think most of the recommendations that I've heard are things that we ought to be doing. But the question has been, what, in my mind, what can we do immediately? As the chief has already done on a number of things, the things that they brought to the table, what can we do as a council immediately, and what are those things that might take a little bit longer to accomplish, and then have some way of acknowledging that. But then I think the final thing, and this is one of the things that the effective government, we need to end up with a report or a product that can document the metrics that we committed to this community that we would have. We said that we were going to have a community plan around being safe, but we would have the metrics. And I know that that follows a lot of the assessment within CMPD, but there are also some metrics that we will be able to follow on our own. And I think getting that up, you know, we've already adopted the housing metrics dashboard. We need this dashboard. So I would hope that by the recommendations would have a really robust public forum that people would come down on. That would be October the 12th. But if we're going to adopt by the end of the month, I think that I would encourage the chairs of all of the committees, and particularly the members of this committee, work with the staff to write a document. I have found that memory is a great thing, but having something that's written and codified and voted on, and so the next time that there's an opportunity to discuss these issues, that we're not working from what we remind ourselves, but from a document that has been adopted fully by the council. So I know it's a lot of work to be done, but I think that this has probably been one of the most important efforts that we can have right now, and it's worth the time and energy to put into it. So that's my suggestion. I expect that we'll learn more about this after we start on November the 5th, but I really would like for us to know that we adopt a report in the end that is entered into the record so that we can measure what we have committed to do, and the community is very aware of what actions we've taken.
Agree completely. I've got the vice chair, and then I've got Ms. Watlington.
So I wanted to wait at the end and just thank everyone, including the citizens, for your participation. As comments have made earlier, this was a labor of love for you. You had passion around this topic, and you wanted to move our city forward. And I think we will become a better city with your input. I have to give kudos to our city manager. I think in my 18 years of serving, I've only witnessed this twice, that a city manager that said, I'm going to staff something that's important to our community. Thank you, sir, with all the 8,000 employees you have and the other committees that you personally wanted to make sure this was a good process. Federico, just a great job. It's hard taking in a short period of time that we did and to get input, to have everyone to respect the process. And sometimes when you build a trust, it's about the process, respecting the process. You were a great ambassador for that. And the young lady who created all of this, brouhaha, Ms. Watlington. I remember, I'm not going to tell too much, but Ms. Watlington, we thank you for your vision. That engineering brain kind of helped us lay out all this. And I can remember, people don't know, we spent one Saturday all day really trying to make sure the process can facilitate the end product that we hope that this city would appreciate. So thank you, Ms. Watlington. And Mr. Chairman, great job.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Watlington.
Thank you for that, James. I'm just very, very impressed with how we took a framework and really delivered on it. And so I'm proud of staff and everybody who's been involved. Thank you to my colleagues. I appreciate the work that everybody's done and the different perspectives that have been brought, things that we thought were not possible, things that we thought were too far down the path. I think that everybody has really shown up to deliver new outcomes. And so I'm excited for where we're going from here. I think this is just an example of what we can do when we all work together and we choose courageous leadership. The only thing that I had left is actually topical. There was one thing, Chief, that I know that we talked about briefly, and I just wanted to make sure we addressed because there was effort put into the discussion regarding the relationship between Citizens Review Board and Civil Service Board. I wanted to just lift that up and hear your perspective in regards to that. The request, and I think Ms. Jamison is still on the phone, she may be able to speak to it, but the request was about being able to refer CRB cases to the Civil Service Board. So I wanted to hear you speak briefly on that, Chief.
Yes, thank you for that. I just wanted to make it everyone's attention when we talk about that the Civil Service Board is the appellate arm for officers who have been disciplined. If you take that and you now have the Civil Service Board handing down that discipline, you also take away the appeal process and due process for officers who have been disciplined. So when that proposal came out, I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that and that maybe there's another way to do it or some other alternatives for what you're trying to achieve. But to take away an officer's due process would be an unintended circumstance for that proposal.
I don't know if Ms. Jameson had anything on that, but that I'm sure is in our packet as something we'll discuss. I just want to make sure we understood all of the unintended consequences.
Okay, you're fading on us a little bit there. Did you have anything else, Ms. Watlington?
I was just saying Ms. Jameson may have had something to offer up on that. I saw that she's no longer on mute.
Oh, I was looking for my hand raise function. Oh, I missed it. But anyway, would you like me to comment now, Chairman Eggleston?
Absolutely.
So the Citizens Review Board has not taken this up as a board as a whole. We were waiting to see if there was going to be some actual discussion on council as far as whether or not this is something that the council actually wants to move forward. So we have not had a meeting or discussed this as a board, waiting to see what the council is thinking and how the council wants to move forward with, or whether or not the council even wants to move forward with this recommendation.
Ms. Watlington?
Whoa. That's it for me. That was what I wanted to understand was what the landscape was. Okay.
Thank you. And I've got Mr. Bakari here in a second. One thing I want to say as well, we all thanked the community input group, and while the community input group will not still be meeting every other week, I do hope that we can keep that nucleus of people together, at least as an email list, because I think that there are going to be things as we go along, inevitably, the discussions and potential actions that we take on October 5th and later in October. Lots of things as we start to roll out some of the different initiatives to try to address violent crime in our community, which I think there is unified agreement. We want the actual implementation of those efforts to be community-led. We're going to continue to need the guidance and wisdom of this group. And I think there's going to be a lot of times where there's going to be action or an ask or a need as it relates to interfacing with the community that's probably better if it comes from the groups, from the individuals on this community input group, because there are parts of our city undoubtedly where you have a trust built up over time that we as elected officials don't, or we as CMPD officers or government officials, whatever it is, the message coming from us is not going to resonate in the same way that it does from you. So I hope that you'll all be willing to answer that call as those calls come, because I think your continued involvement, though it might be more informal going forward than it has been recently, is still very critical, and and still something that we need. Mr. Bakari?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have a comment and a question that I probably will address to a mixture of Ms. Jameson and Mr. Rios there, but because I think that's probably the best place to address it. But the comment first is, I will join my colleagues in saying there's a lot of good, hard work, a lot of tough conversations to get to this point. Really appreciate the community input group and the effort that's been put forward there. I know that is no small task, and it is certainly a good input. Also want to thank the chief, the police department, and all of our colleagues who have worked alongside, and really taken an approach that I think everyone would say that's not a combative approach. That's working with to try to make changes. I will ask the question, though, on the flip side of that is we really, at least in my own, I'll use my words, in my mind, the community input group really was to serve two purposes. One is exactly that, drive us towards the direction where we need to go for the type of change we need. The other, though, was help us as we're achieving that change, be the megaphone outward into the community to help us speak with one voice, particularly at times when it's most necessary. And I will say that it is very likely one of those most necessary times is upon us this week. And this Thursday, we're going to be releasing film on a very tragic incident that we all know and we've all read the transcripts and things about at Mr. Easter. And I will say that
Mr. Bakari, I don't know how far along we are, Mr. Manager, on what announcements been made.
I have to turn it.
No.
We're good.
Nothing has changed from the last conversations I've had with you.
Has there been any?
Regardless of what status that's in, I think we know, we've seen the stories, and there's a lot of concern out there, right? I'm not sure exactly where that is in the process. My broader point still is that we've got to communicate outward to the community some of the progress that we have made together. And I believe that it is a great task for this community input group to also discuss how do we communicate outward to the community these progress points, not just from council in our media outputs, but within their grassroots networks. So whether it's Ms. Jameson or Mr. Rios, has that topic come up of how we start communicating outward, not from the city council, not from city staff and government, but particularly the community input group itself as to how we are moving forward together as a team to do these things, and how the next time that incidents occur, or the next time that there is outrage, that we're at least trying to speak with a unified voice.
So in the interest of sharing as much as I know in relation to the community input group, we've discussed continuing a line of communication as was shared earlier. I know it was set an email list, but I made it a point to share whenever important topics were to arise, we would continue to work in tandem with this group to share out information, and also to just ensure that there's more than a one-way communication, right? That everyone is interfacing fairly regularly. So with that said, we do plan on keeping this group informed and working in tandem with them, not only to receive their input, but obviously to get their assistance on ensuring that the topics that are addressed in government are properly vetted and spoken to in the general community. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but we will continue to work in tandem with this group, as the manager has mentioned, to ensure that we're having a two-way communication.
I see. And Ms. Jameson, I mean, have you guys as an input group had any conversations about the protocols and things of that nature on how communication could be achieved in an orchestrated manner through that group?
No, Councilman Bakari. Right now, if you think about it, this group has come together because there are so many concerns about how we are operating, how public safety is being done in the community. So I think first of all, we need to see the actual steps that you're talking about being put in place so that we can build that trust. I mean, just the makeup of the group, how many members are from the activist community who have so many concerns about police transparency and information. So I think our first steps is going to see what this council does as a body to actually implement some of the changes that have been recommended. And then once we see that, we can come back and have that conversation about protocols when the time is necessary. But right now, we need to, the group itself wants to see more of the actual steps and recommendations that they put in place actually, or recommended at least, actually be put in place before we can talk about them. Because it sounds like to me what you're saying is you would like to see the CIG group kind of be like a, like a PR for what the council's trying to do. But right now, the council hasn't done anything to engender that kind of trust really among the group, with the exception of calling this group together and asking for recommendations. The next step is to see how those recommendations are actually put into place.
I would, that's good points. I would articulate it less as a PR strategy and more as a crisis management capability while we are all making progress in good faith together. For example, we are discussing, among many other things, having a subpoena power on the legislative agenda, not just having it on, but saying, okay, this would be the strategy, even though it's a long shot with the General Assembly to getting it done. Right. So I'll tell you, we are working and pushing the envelope on many fronts. And I'm not looking for random PR updates to the community of, hey, here's what we did. I'm more thinking of from a crisis management perspective, when the next incidents come, whenever those in whatever form they may take, here's how we're going to, as we continue to progress towards an end state, not be at an end state, speak with a unified voice for that meaning and matter, not for anything beyond that.
I think, in all honesty, that we would actually need I think it would help, I'll say this, if the council itself is speaking as a unified voice, which hasn't always happened in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens moving forward. I will say, though, that to expect a community input group when you have so many different opinions and so many different voices in a group, to expect that they would speak as a unified voice when something does occur, I don't think it's necessarily realistic. You're going to get some people who are going to come on one side of the issue, some people who are going to come on another side of the issue, and I don't think that's really the role that this group envisioned themselves doing when it was called together to make these recommendations.
Thank you.
I think that's a fair point, Ms. Jamison. I know the Mayor Pro Tem wants to say something, so I'll let her put a bow on our discussion today. Unless she's fallen off the call. Oh, she's muted. Which I guess means somebody else has the ability to unmute her. I don't know if I think she might be dialed in.
Wendy, can you please unmute Mayor Pro Tem?
Hey, everybody.
There we go.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I called in. I apologize. I had another meeting that overlapped for the first hour, but I have been able to go, be in the other meetings and watch them. And I too just want to join the voices that have thanked the participants in this effort, because it's hard. It's a big time commitment. There's a ton of information out there. And more importantly, there's no blueprint. I have been involved in conversations with large city councils around the country, and everybody's looking to see what each other is doing and looking for a playbook, which just doesn't exist. So in that, we are making this as organic as possible. That's really specific to Charlotte right now. That's so important, and I'm grateful for the leadership of all of you that want to participate in this, and will hold us accountable for the work. As Ms. Jamison said, it's not really about what we say, it's about what we do. And going forward, that's going to be hard work, but I'm hopeful that we can get there. Even if we don't have all 11 voices at one time, that's our job to try to get there. And so I, look forward to doing the hard work. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And with that, I'll look to my vice chair for the famous Mitchell motion.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Or Vice Chair, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, and we'll look forward to the work the Budget Committee will do this afternoon, and to all being together on Monday to keep it moving forward. Thanks again to everybody that's joined us.
Thanks.